On this channel, I have covered many of the benefits of CANZUK, the proposed alliance between Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the United Kingdom, encompassing areas like free trade, free movement and deeper military and foreign policy cooperation. And while it is good, of course, to point out these positives of such a grouping, especially due to the current instability of global geopolitics, I thought it would be valuable to also make a video going over the common criticisms of CANZUK and debunking and dismantling them. This can both stand as a record and to help create transparency around the subject, ensuring that all aspects have been considered and we're not sort of burying our heads in the sand over any of these issues, as they are very important to discuss. This video will include even the more serious accusations against CANZUK that I've seen as well, such as it being a racist grouping or a neo-imperialist delusion and many more. We'll cover all of that in this video, but I first want to give a massive shout out to the CANZUK Outreach Discord server linked in the description box below, and I'll put a QR code up on screen now as well to join it. They have done some incredible research for many of these issues and continue to be one of the most important sources for spreading the word about CANZUK, most notably through their crowd-funded advertising campaign. So please do get involved if you're interested. As I say, I've linked it down below. I'm also in the server, so I will be chatting intermittently in there as well, so make sure to go and join it. I also do have a really exciting and large-scale CANZUK project coming very soon regarding military cooperation and the best way to initiate that and how it can stand as a first step towards CANZUK, which I've already posted a teaser video about running through what's going on, so make sure to go and check that out after this video as well. But without further ado, let's get into these common criticisms of CANZUK. So why not start with the most controversial and dispel the allegations of racism that people pile onto CANZUK as an idea? Of course, CANZUK is not a racially motivated movement. No one of any note is mentioning race as a factor in pushing forward CANZUK. This is prevalent in the way that it directly excludes plenty of other majority white and European nations from membership, although some nations and polities may be included in the future, but those of course will be addressed later. The reason for CANZUK only being the 4 white majority nations, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the United Kingdom, is because they all meet certain criteria that make a free movement and collaborative union far easier than those with other nations. Membership is based purely on objective criteria, not ethnicity or race. Taking the first example, shared legal and governance systems, CANZUK countries operating under nearly identical Westminster-style parliamentary systems, sharing a common law legal tradition, and this institutional compatibility significantly reduces the practical barriers to implementing free movement, mutual recognition of qualifications, and integrated policy coordination, which are some of the main things and some of the initial steps also that can be taken to implement CANZUK. The importance of these shared systems, these Westminster parliamentary systems and shared legal systems, cannot be overstated. They create a foundation for seamless integration that would otherwise be extraordinarily difficult to achieve between more disparate nations, regardless of their racial composition. This is why countries like France and Germany are not included in the CANZUK idea either, despite being white majority, because they have a massively different basis in their legal and governance traditions. Economic development is also a massive factor, with CANZUK nations possessing comparable economic development levels with similar GDP per capita, labour standards and social welfare infrastructures, with this economic alignment preventing the massive labour market disruptions that would come if CANZUK was established between economies that had vastly different stages of development. Integrating a nation that had significantly lower GDP per capita would create unsustainable migration pressures and economic imbalances that would undermine the proposed cooperation framework. Similar cultures and shared heritage, resulting in common customs, standards and beliefs when compared to any other grouping of nations, as well as of course a shared language, all make cooperation a lot easier. Again, if you take the example of France and Germany, while they do have comparable GDP data, they don't share common language, history, culture, things like that, which are all objective criteria that makes this whole grouping idea seamless. As well as these, there is also, of course, alignment on global values and policies. A quantitative analysis of UN General Assembly voting records, for example, reveals a remarkable congruence in foreign policy and values between Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, voting together on a wide range of issues significantly more often than with other major powers, reflecting shared perspectives on human rights, international law, and global governance, with this diplomatic alignment ensuring a coherent joint stance on the world stage. As well as this, there are pre-existing multilateral frameworks, with deep integration being more pragmatic because they already have an extensive ecosystem of existing security and trade agreements, including the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, NATO membership for the UK and Canada, and NATO partnership for Australia and New Zealand, the Five Power Defence Arrangements, and a web of bilateral free trade agreements, with these proven frameworks providing the trusted institutional architecture necessary to implement the ambitious CANZUK cooperation more efficiently. So as you can see here, there are a number of objective criteria that a country must meet to be able to integrate seamlessly into CANZUK, and that is the reason for this choice of nations. There's 4 nations in particular, not because of race or ethnicity. That is completely false, and I hope I have laid out a few reasons why due to these objective criteria. And besides, it's not like CANZUK nations are monolithically white societies. There are diverse ranges of people living and working there, and each nation is home to major long-standing non-white ethnic groups that are integral to its identity, such as the First Nations, the Métis people, the Inuit people in Canada, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia, the Maori people in New Zealand, and numerous communities of Asian, African, and Caribbean descent across all 4 countries. Each CANZUK nation has also implemented, of course, substantial anti-racism initiatives at government level, further undermining the characterization of these countries as seeking to establish a racially neutral alliance or a white-only alliance. All of these nations have long-standing laws and government policies which prevent legal discrimination. Establishing a successful CANZUK alliance would also strengthen the broader Commonwealth anyway. It would create a demonstration effect showing the tangible benefits of good governance, rule of law, and democratic institutions, incentivizing reform elsewhere in the Commonwealth by providing concrete examples of how adherence to these principles facilitates successful international cooperation and economic growth. Rather than excluding non-member nations, CANZUK would provide a model for emulating these and a catalyst for improvement in governance standards across the rest of the Commonwealth. And then in future, if further nations can prove that they meet these criteria, they're more than welcome to join CANZUK. It is also worth mentioning briefly that another of the criteria is educational standards, which you will have seen on the list a moment ago, with CANZUK countries all having extremely high literacy rates and maintaining highly compatible educational systems with mutual recognition of academic qualifications, facilitating the seamless exchange of students and professionals. And this alignment, which can be supported by frameworks like the 2016 Australia-Canada Mutual Recognition of Qualifications Agreement, reduces bureaucratic barriers to labour mobility and collaborative research initiatives in critical fields such as science and technology. So in short, is CANZUK racist? Is it a whites-only club? No, of course it's not. Obviously it's not based on anything like race or ethnicity. It is purely on these objective criteria that I have laid out so far in this video, possibly quite long-windedly, but let's get on to some more CANZUK criticisms. Now, the next one I wanted to talk about is equally as controversial, really. It's people saying that CANZUK is a neo-imperial delusion, or it's an imperial nostalgia reforged as an alliance in the modern world, many criticising it as being this sort of revival of the British Empire, as an imitation of the past, but this could not be further from the truth. I've even had a YouTuber, a very prominent Canadian YouTuber actually, replying to me in a comment on one of of their videos, saying that the idea of CANZUK is a Victorian-era delusion. So I won't mention names, but it was a very prominent YouTuber. So it's safe to say that this is a relevant criticism to be discussing. The characterization, though, fundamentally misinterprets the initiative's forward-looking nature and its foundation in contemporary mutual interest. CANZUK is not a top-down effort to recapture past glory from the UK, but it is a pragmatic bottom-up proposal for cooperation between four sovereign and equal nations that recognise their shared values and complementary strengths in an increasingly uncertain world. The structure, goals and principles of the CANZUK proposal are explicitly designed for the 21st century, not the Victorian era, and beyond. The shared history between the nations is just one of the factors that makes the proposal as practical as it is. CANZUK, unlike the British Empire, is not defined by a centralised power structure emanating from London with subordinate colonies and later domains. In stark contrast, in fact, CANZUK is conceived as a collaboration between four sovereign peers. Canada, Australia and New Zealand are vibrant, independent nations with their own unique identities and global interests, just like the United Kingdom, and the proposal for CANZUK explicitly rejects any supranational parliament or court like the EU has, ensuring all sovereignty remains with the national governments. This structure of intergovernmental cooperation, similar to the proven Australia-New Zealand Closer Economic Relations CER agreement, is the antithesis of an imperial model. The goal of the initiative is focused more on achieving concrete 21st century goals such as enhancing supply chain resilience for critical goods, fostering collaboration in leading technologies like AI, and more practical industrial concerns and, of course, military concerns, bolstering collective security and democratic solidarity. It is a strategic response to contemporary geopolitics, which is the whole reason for a renewed surge in CANZUK interest. Events like Brexit, growing skepticism of US foreign policy reliability under different administrations have demonstrated the vulnerabilities of relying on single partners, and Canada has been feeling this the most, which is one of the reasons why Canada is the most prominent nation pushing forward CANZUK, even mentioning it explicitly in their election campaigns. So you can see how it is a third way between isolationism or integrating into a bloc with differing political values. A coalition of highly aligned nations like CANZUK can pool their influence into negotiating more effectively with larger powers like the US, EU and China, enhancing each member's individual sovereignty and global standing rather than weakening sovereignty, which is inevitable for all member nations if they isolate or try to appease regional powers alone. This in itself is another criticism of CANZUK. You have some people saying that the only way to get influence in the world is to integrate into a massive multilateral bloc like the European Union, and on the other end of the spectrum you have people arguing that you should take more of an isolationist stance and negotiate as a lone independent state. Now, CANZUK is more of a middle path. It's focused cooperation with natural allies whilst preserving sovereignty that avoids both the pitfalls of cumbersome supranational entities and also the limitations of going it alone. By leveraging pre-existing alignments, CANZUK creates a cohesive and powerful partnership that is greater than the sum of its parts without demanding the significant political concessions required by the other options. CANZUK is also a partnership without free riders, with a common criticism from detractors within each member nation is the claim that CANZUK would asymmetrically benefit the other partners at their own expense. But this zero-sum perspective misunderstands the complementary rather than competitive nature of the four economies and the design of the CANZUK proposal. It is structured to provide distinct and significant advantages to each member, with all benefiting and all contributing something unique from the others. I'll put up some brief examples of what each member nation brings to the table up on the screen so you can pause and have a read if you want to of the kind of unique benefits that each nation brings to the CANZUK proposal. Again, they are complementary, not competitive, and combined CANZUK could dominate in major fields. Agriculture as a collective, it would be one of the largest exporters of food in the world. It would also have the largest global stockpiles of lithium, cobalt and uranium, critical for the tech and energy sectors of much of the world, and and it would be in the top 3 for total energy resources, including oil, natural gas, coal, and nuclear, and it would be a huge producer of base metals such as iron, copper, nickel, and zinc, which could be used for export, all to bolster heavy industry and manufacturing for the CANZUK bloc. All of these natural advantages paired with the diplomatic and soft power benefits, as well as, of course, military benefits that give CANZUK immense leverage in any negotiations. Alright, so far we've gone through a few of the major criticisms of CANZUK, the racism allegations, the accusations of imperial nostalgia or a neo-imperialist vision, why it can actually be more effective than both large blocs like the European Union who have a really deep degree of integration, and also the isolationist idea of going it alone, and we have also dispelled the idea that CANZUK would be a free rider alliance, or that some of the member states might be free riding off the others. We've dispelled all of those so far, so I thought I'd round out the video going through a few of the minor issues that don't come up as often, but I thought would be good to include in this video anyway. And the first of those, the kind of miscellaneous arguments here, is the complexity of including overseas territories into CANZUK. So of course we know that freedom of movement is one of the main ideas that is put forward between the CANZUK nations, and these territories, majority of which are from the UK, are to be included in CANZUK freedom of movement, with some potential exceptions such as Gibraltar due to the current free movement agreement that they have with the European Union. That would be something that would have to be ironed out, of course. Each member would govern their territories per their own domestic laws. CANZUK simply extends the home country's benefits of free movement to the other territories and their respective nations. This mirrors the long-standing constitutional arrangements for British overseas territories, where local governance is maintained under the sovereignty of the member state, and equivalent agreement arrangements with Australia, New Zealand and Canada have with their own overseas territories as well. So this would simply extend the free movement. Talking of free movement though, many people actually have an issue with the idea of free movement in a CANZUK alliance in general. And this is something I have seen in my comments section, but just to dispel this quickly, there are proven safeguards with freedom of movement systems. Criminal screenings, health screenings, welfare residency periods, and deportation powers, of course, will prevent systemic risks. And if we are already following and just expanding the idea of the Australian-New Zealand model, the Trans-Tasman travel arrangement, this has already worked really well, and despite the population disparities between the two countries, they both maintain about net neutral migration under free movement, showing that this model can work. The data, of course, is taken over the last few decades because the agreement's been in place for a long time now. Year by year, the data and the figures can differ quite a bit, but in general, it is a net neutral migration over this long period of the agreement being in place. Now also with free movement, people have brought up Northern Ireland and whether this system would change or destabilise the border with the Republic. No, there would be no change to the current system with the Ireland-UK Common Travel Area, which was eventually maintained through Brexit. EU citizens no longer have freedom of movement within the UK, but the Irish citizens still do. But yes, free movement of course applies only to the CANZUK citizens, or would in a potential CANZUK alliance. Existing Ireland-UK visa rules would remain unchanged. And the final CANZUK criticism I want to mention here is that people say the large, vast distances between the CANZUK nations makes it unfeasible, none of them are major trading partners, and there is a geographical and trade mismatch between them. Now, I think this is a bit of an over-exaggerated issue. If you have a look at the combined GDP of the CANZUK nations, 40% of their GDP is made up of digital services, which of course don't take into account distance. They transcend the idea of distance. Fintech, AI and education partnerships, for example, thrive remotely, and online services could have 24-hour support easily by hiring across CANZUK nations, because combined CANZUK nations nations have 24 hours of daylight. In other words, there is always a CANZUK nation who is currently working within usual working hours. Also, in a modern globalized world with the tech advancements that we have with shipping and everything like that, distance is far less of a factor than it was even 50 years ago now. So I really do think some of these CANZUK criticisms are kind of clutching at straws, trying to find things to point out about it. But I think the main ones that I went through at the beginning of this video were the most controversial and the ones that I see most often online in my comments section and around the internet when someone brings up CANZUK, especially the first two that I covered in the earlier stages of this video. But I've been rambling along for long enough now. I'll round this video to the end. I want to give a huge thank you to Drift from the CANZUK Outreach server, who did most of the research for this video, an incredible document that he produced for me with all the research going into these CANZUK criticisms. A massive thank you also to the rest of the CANZUK Outreach server, the volunteers who created the kind of baseline for these CANZUK criticisms that was then expanded upon for the research for this video as well. If you want to get involved in this server, there are many things you can do to help push forward CANZUK. They have an amazing advertising campaign that they are currently undertaking as well, so I will put all the links in the description down below to join the server. Thank you very much for making it to the end of this video. Let me know what you think about these criticisms. Have you seen any of them online? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to support me further, you can join the channel as a member. You can also buy me a coffee to keep me going using the links in the description down below as well. I will have all the sources for the footage and everything that's been up on screen in there as well if you want to check the original videos out. As always though, thank you very much for watching and I will see you in the next one.